Lieutenant Kyle Redford sneered, his boots slamming the door wide open like he owned the place. A black woman in a house this nice. Gotta be cozying up to some rich guy, he spat, his words dripping with venom. But Monica Beckford didn't flinch. No scream, no tears, just a steady gaze and a cool, "My husband's on his way." 3 minutes later, the door swung open again, and in strode the deputy director of the FBI. The room went dead silent, guns dropped, jaws locked. This wasn't just a botched raid. It was a gut punch to a system used to trampling over black lives without a fight. The air crackled with tension, the kind that makes you hold your breath and wonder, would you stay quiet, or would you roar back? A relentless pounding shattered the quiet. No doorbell, no courtesy, just fists hammering the door like a judge's gavel. Monica stood in her elegant foyer, shoulders squared, breath steady, her eyes giving nothing away. Outside, a gruff voice barked again, "Open the door, now!" She moved deliberately, her hand grazing the handle, opening it just enough to face the storm head-on. 2 officers loomed on her porch. The taller one, broad and white, wore a smirk that screamed he'd already made up his mind about her. The other, shorter, fidgety, scanned her pristine property like he was lost but too proud to admit it. "Nice place," the tall one drawled, his tone mocking, eyes raking over her home. "Yours?" Monica's voice was smooth as silk, but sharp as a blade. "I designed the kitchen myself," she said, unfazed, her words carrying a quiet strength that dared him to push further. His smirk twisted, like he smelled something foul, and he leaned in, uninvited, peering past her as if searching for someone to prove his point. His partner, Ben Laser, hovered near his holster, fingers itching like trouble was his default setting. "Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any confrontation with the HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel." Questioned, Monica didn't move, didn't flinch. She merely raised her hand, holding out a folder, her property deed, identification, and mortgage statements, documents, clear and legal. But Ben didn't look at them, he looked at her skin. Kyle Redford, the one in charge, turned to his partner and said loud enough for Monica to hear, "Chuck Laboney, probably screwing the owner. No way she lives here." The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, precise, a blade sliding between ribs. Monica's gaze locked onto Kyle's eyes, and something inside him blinked without moving. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move, but she answered with precision. "The price for today's mistake will not be small." The wind shifted. It was sudden, intangible, but it was there. The space between them, once assumed to belong to authority, now felt trespassed. The house behind Monica, bathed in quiet elegance, seemed to breathe around her. Clean white walls, dark wood floors, subtle art, not ostentatious, purposeful, and now invaded. Kyle's jaw tightened. He stepped closer again, trying to regain control of the space he no longer owned. "You got ID on that pretty mouth of yours?" he asked, tone sliding between contempt and provocation. Monica didn't respond. She simply stared, unmoved, unbroken, untouchable. Ben shifted uncomfortably. The paper Monica had offered was still in her hand, unaccepted, as though proof meant nothing in this game. And that was the game. She knew it. They weren't here for facts. They were here for dominance, for submission, and when it didn't come, Kyle's posture grew stiffer. "You know," he said, tilting his head, "we got a report. A black woman breaking into a white home. It's our job to respond." "This is a white home?" Monica asked flatly. Kyle smirked. It was until now. She lowered her arm, still holding the documents, letting them rest against her thigh. Her eyes never left his. "Then you'll need to explain how I've been paying the mortgage since 2018. Ben's eyes darted between them, something in his stance softening for a moment. Doubt. It flashed, then vanished under the pressure of Kyle's certainty. Monica caught it, but didn't exploit it yet. She just waited. Her restraint wasn't weakness. It was a strategy, Kyle crossed his arms, doing everything but puffing out his chest. You got a husband, lady. Maybe he should be here. Handle this like a man. You seem to be handling it like a child, she said. Ben's hand twitched again, closer to the gun this time, Kyle noticed. Didn't stop him. I suggest you step aside, Kyle said. Let us do our job. This isn't your job, Monica answered. This is your assumption. Wearing a badge, Kyle's face flushed. You want to be arrested for obstruction. I'm on my property, she replied. You have no warrant, you have no probable cause, you have an ego, a prejudice, and a gun. That's not enough. Kyle took another step, now within reach. Careful, sweetheart, that attitude won't get you sympathy in the report. There won't be a report, she said. There will be a case file and you'll be in it. Ben cleared his throat. Maybe we should. No, Kyle cut in. She wants to play lawyer. Let her. But I'm not leaving until we get this sorted. That's the first honest thing you've said, Monica replied. She turned deliberately slow and walked back inside, leaving the door wide open. It wasn't an invitation. It was a dare. Kyle followed. Ben hesitated, glanced over his shoulder at the street. Silent, clean suburban, and stepped inside, too. The house swallowed them, warm lighting, polished surfaces, not a single thing out of place except for them. Kyle's boots scuffed the marble floor. He looked around, opally sneering, bit much for a school teacher. I never said I was, Monica replied from the center of the room. Ben looked up at the vaulted ceilings, the modern staircase, and the recessed lighting. Who decorated this place? He asked, not out of interest, but as if it might help him rewrite what he didn't understand. Monica looked at him. The same woman holding the deed you ignored. Kyle moved toward a console table, running his hand along the edge as if it offended him. He was looking for something to prove his prejudice right. Proof of fraud, of deception, of guilt. But there was nothing. Ben's hand brushed the door frame. Monica noticed. She noticed everything. You came here for a ghost, she said. And now you found yourselves haunting a place that doesn't belong to you. Kyle laughed. It was sharp. Forced. You talk big for someone outnumbered. She stepped forward slowly and steadily, closing the space an inch at a time. I'm not outnumbered. I'm outgunned. There's a difference. And only one of those things scares me. Kyle said nothing. Ben's hand slipped from the gun. The silence was complete. No music. No television. No outside noise. Just breathing. Heavy, uneven. And Monica, still and calm. The eye of a storm they didn't see coming. And then a whisper of steel in her voice. Last chance to rethink your next move. Kyle scoffed, but Ben blinked. The air hadn't changed, but the room had. As Kyle Redford crossed the threshold without invitation and Ben Laser followed close behind, it was no longer just a house, it became territory taken. A line crossed not just in law but in arrogance. Monica Beckford didn't move to stop them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even shift her stance. She simply watched calm and composed as two uniformed intruders tried to assert a claim on that they didn't understand and couldn't own. Ben was the first to speak, his voice casual in the way cowards often try to sound brave. If this is your house, he said, eyes grazing the surroundings like a thief, pretending to admire art, then there shouldn't be anything to hide. His words hung in the room like cheap perfume meant to distract, but never able to mask the stench of suspicion beneath. Monica's gaze didn't shift from Kyle. She let the accusation pass, not because it didn't sting, but because it lacked the weight to pierce her armor. She'd heard it before. She'd lived inside it. The assumption that she had something to prove, just by being here, just by existing in a space too fine, too quiet, too distant from their idea of who she was allowed to be. Kyle, meanwhile, made himself at home like a man used to being obeyed. His eyes scanned the decor, not with curiosity, but contempt, a deliberate step forward, the clink of boot against tile like punctuation in a bad monologue. Maybe her husband's, Locked in a closet somewhere, he muttered, a grin pulling at the corner of his mouth. Dark humor wrapped in the sick thrill of imagined authority. Monica didn't take the bait. She didn't offer a denial. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, precise, deliberately, and looked up. Her eyes met the soft curve of the ceiling, where a discreet camera lens was barely visible in the architectural molding. A breath passed. She let her gaze fall back down straight into Kyle's. The silence pressed. He caught it. Not the camera itself, not yet, but the intent behind her gesture. It wasn't a warning. It was a countdown. Kyle stepped to the side, wandering toward a lacquered oak cabineta built-in bar, tastefully integrated into the living room wall. He ran his fingers across the handles, testing the weight of the doors like a child looking for candy in someone else's kitchen. Monica's voice slid through the air, soft, but sharp enough to draw blood. "You just touched something that doesn't belong to you," she said. The sentence stopped him, just for a second. Her tone wasn't accusing, it was conclusive. No volume, no threat, just precision like a gavel striking wood. Kyle turned toward her, expression tight. "This whole house is one big performance," he snapped. "A black woman with federal-style molding and imported rugs. You think that makes you immune?" She didn't flinch. "It makes me documented." Ben wandered toward the center of the room. The more he moved, the more the unease set in. He looked down and paused. The rug beneath his boots, deep navy, ornate, clearly custom, had something stitched subtly into the weave. He squinted, crouched slightly, and ran his hand across the edge. A pattern not decorative but symbolic, a seal not local, not residential. A federal insignia embedded just enough to be deniable, but present enough for anyone who knew what to look for. Ben didn't, but he knew enough to feel unsettled. He opened his mouth, but said nothing. Monica saw it, the crack, small but growing. The rug wasn't just a rug, it was a threshold, just like the doorway, just like the silence. She refused to fill in with their demands. Kyle leaned against the bar, still trying to read the room like it was a suspect he could break. "So, what's the plan, lady?" he said. "You going to play Miss Congeniality while we check if this place is yours?" "I don't need to play anything," Monica said, stepping just slightly to the side, not to retreat, but to refrain. Her voice remained measured as if her breath came from a place deeper than lungs, from certainty, from history. "You walked into a space you don't understand based on a report you didn't question, driven by a fear you've never had to name." Kyle's laugh was dry. "Spare me the TED Talk." "You spared yourself a warrant," she answered. Ben's posture faltered. He looked toward the foyer, toward the door that now felt farther than it should. The space between entry and exit had turned into something warped, an arena where every footstep carried legal weight. He tugged at the edge of his vest. Sweat prickled. Beneath it, Kyle, still oblivious or too stubborn to admit he wasn't in control, turned and pulled at one of the liquor cabinet drawers. It resisted. Locked. Monica didn't move, but her voice returned low and cold. "That drawer is older than your badge," she said, "and protected by something with sharper teeth." He let go, turning his back to her for a moment. "Nothing in this place scares me." "No," she said, "because fear requires self-awareness." Ben finally spoke. "Maybe we should wait for confirmation from dispatch. If this checks out." Kyle cut him off. "It doesn't matter. We're already inside." Monica stepped toward the center of the room now. Not challenging, not chasing, just reclaiming air. "And every step you take without cause is one more you'll have to justify to someone you won't see coming." Kyle turned around, jaw tight, but eyes flickering with something he hadn't expected to feel in this house: doubt. Ben's eyes returned to the rug again. That seal, it nodded at him, something about it wasn't just decorative, it was official. Maybe a replication, maybe not. But it meant this house wasn't just privately owned. It was layered legally, structurally, and politically. He looked up at Monica and suddenly felt the weight of what they were stepping on. Not just the rug, but the foundation it rested on. Kyle still tried to play the role. You trying to intimidate us with your decor? He asked, because I've seen better. It's not for you, she replied. It never was. And for a moment, just a beat, there was nothing but breath in the room. Ben adjusted his belt. Kyle glanced at the still-closed drawer, and Monica stood in the center like gravity had chosen her. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, the line had already been drawn. It wasn't the furniture that changed, nor the lighting, nor the temperature. But when Kyle pointed toward the sleek cream-colored sofa and barked, "Sit," the room warped again, not physically, spiritually. The subtle scent of sandalwood and quiet elegance in the air now clashed against the raw stink of power misused. Monica did not resist. She sat deliberately, precisely like a queen, accepting the insult of a peasant's order just to watch him drown in his hubris. Her back remained straight, her fingers rested calmly in her lap, but her eyes remained weapons, sharpened and unshathed. Kyle circled like a man convinced he was in control, as if the rug under his feet had erased the laws above his head. So he sneered, "You live here, or are you just crashing after your shift ends?" He let the insinuation hang, draped in venom, dipped in the old stink of misogyny and racism, barely disguised. Monica raised an eyebrow, not because she was offended, but because he thought that was clever. "Does your badge prove innocence?" she asked. "Or us broadcast authority too fragile to hold its tongue?" The words hit harder than anything physical. Kyle blinked once, just enough to betray the hit, then recovered with a scoff and a shake of the head, circling to the edge of the glass coffee table that now separated him from her. He wasn't just interrogating, he was performing, but for whom he didn't know any more. Ben, uncomfortable in the periphery, took the opportunity to move. He reached into Monica's handbag, left on the end of the couch, and pulled out her wallet, with the hesitation of someone looking for something they didn't want to find. He flipped it open, thumbing through IDs, credit cards, papers, nothing illegal, nothing strange, but that didn't stop him. Monica didn't move, her voice cut across the room like a courtroom gavel. "You just violated Title 42, U.S. Code, Section 1983, she said without raising her tone. "Color of law, civil liability. You'll find the President in Monroe Vape 1961, if you need a refresher." Ben froze, his mouth opened slightly, a breath caught. The ID folder remained in his hand like a burning stone. Kyle stepped in before the silence collapsed further. "Where'd you pick that up?" he asked, smirking but not smiling. "YouTube, TikTok, some influencer lawyer spitting buzzwords in a ring light." "No," Monica said. "I learned it from the original author, my husband. He drafted the federal training protocols for DOJ internal compliance. You might have seen his name if you ever made it to the second page of your manual." The room snapped tight. Not from volume, from impact. Ben looked down. Kyle flinched, just a muscle. But Monica saw it. She saw everything. He tried to shift gears. "You expect us to believe your husband is some federal big shot and you're us lounging here like this. Is that hard to believe?" she asked. "Or just hard for you to accept?" Kyle sneered again. "You talk like you're above us. I talk like I know where I stand," she replied. "And you came here assuming I didn't." Ben cleared his throat. "We're just doing our job," he mumbled, but it sounded hollow, limp, and embarrassed. Monica turned her gaze to him, not angry, not pitying, just surgical. "Your job doesn't start with breaking," she said. "It starts with facts, it ends with accountability. Somewhere between those, you decided fear was more efficient." Kyle stepped forward, resting both hands on the glass table between them. The veins in his wrists stood out. "You think you're going to scare us with words? This is real life, sweetheart, not a law school debate club." She didn't move, didn't blink. In real life, words build the laws that strip you of your badge carefully, permanently. The line cut him deep. He knew it. Ben knew it. The room knew it. For the first time, Kyle's stare didn't feel like dominance. It felt like a gamble gone wrong. You know, he muttered. You people always think the law's on your side until it's not. Monica leaned slightly forward. Just a breath, just enough, and you always think the badge is armor until it's evidence. Ben looked down again. The wallet still in his hand now felt radioactive. He placed it back on the table gently, carefully, as if realizing too late that fingerprints mattered. Kyle's tone turned defensive. You're a smart mouth in a nice house. That's all. No, Monica said. I'm the echo you didn't expect. The one that doesn't shout, doesn't cry, doesn't beg, and still ends up louder than your report will ever read. Kyle stood up straight, stepping back half a pace. It wasn't a retreat, not yet, but it wasn't controlled either. Ben's gaze flicked toward the ceiling, following Monica's earlier glance, and he saw it. A faint circle in the molding, a lens, a camera, possibly two. Hidden, tasteful, but real. And suddenly he remembered every word spoken, every gesture made. Is that he began? Voice quiet, almost childlike. Monica answered before he could finish. Recording audio and video stored off-site. Secure, legal. Kyle turned to Ben. Ignore it. We're still in the clear. No, Monica said. You were never in the clear. You were in denial. The room had turned. The table, once a place for drinks or decor, had become a platform of confrontation. No raised voices, no threats, just the slow collapse of assumption. Under the weight of truth calmly delivered, Kyle stared at her, searching for a weak spot, a flinch, a crack in the armor that might prove she was bluffing. But there was nothing. She sat there like stone, like memory, like the end of an era that didn't realize it was dying. I could arrest you right now. He tried again, but the words lacked voltage. You could, Monica agreed, and the footage would circulate before your report reached your supervisor. Your hands would be on me, your voice on tape, your accusations, your laughter, your ignorance immortalized, and by the time the court hears your side, mine will already be a curriculum. Ben sat down slowly, no longer part of the confrontation, just a witness. Kyle stood alone, not as law, as a loss. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't empty. It was judgment, and it didn't come from Monet. Came from everything she'd built, the house, the law, the language, the history. Kyle finally turned, unable to hold her gaze anymore. This ain't over, he muttered. Monica smiled, the first time, since he entered. Not joy, not mockery, just precision. It hasn't even begun. The silence Kyle left behind had the weight of a threat and the hollowness of a bluff. But it didn't last. It shattered it not with a bang, but with the soft metallic hum of a sliding door being pulled open by hands that didn't ask permission. Ben Lasker had broken away from the unspoken standoff and wandered down the hall like a moth pulled toward light it didn't understand. He touched the handle of the recessed pocket door, gave it a firm pull, and revealed something far more dangerous than any weapon he trained to face a room that didn't hide its purpose, just its implications. Kyle followed, more from reflex than strategy, still simmering from the verbal dismantling he just endured. The room looked sterile at first glance, clean lines, glass shelves, organized files, but the longer they stood there, the more it pulsed, with something unspoken. This wasn't a home office. This wasn't Pinterest. This was infrastructure. And Kyle, drunk on defiance, didn't see it. Ben stepped in first, slower now. The air suddenly too still, too intentional. Cabinets lined the back wall, locked with brushed steel handles that clicked softly when he tried one. Looks like her little. Library's off limits, he mumbled, trying to sound unimpressed, but the unease had begun to settle on his skin like sweat. Kyle, unwilling to show hesitation, stepped up and yanked at a different cabinet. It resisted. His fingers found the edge of a digital padlock, the kind not sold at department stores. What's she hiding? He asked, voice slow, biting. He gave it another tug, then reached for the butt of his flashlight, angling it like a crowbar. Behind them, Monica's voice glided into the room, not raised, not strained, but absolute. You're about to turn a trespass into a felony. Kyle didn't look at her. Relax. It's just a cabinet, unless you're keeping bodies in here. Monica remained at the threshold, a shadow cast in warning. You're standing in a classified archive. Interagency jurisdiction. Violating that is more than bad. It's federal obstruction. Kyle laughed loud. Theatrical lady. I could print this crap off Google and staple it to my fridge. Doesn't mean it's real. But Ben had already frozen in place. His eyes had landed on a binder half exposed. On the desk, a single sheet visible through the transparent cover, marked with a stark black header. Interagency Task Force Joint Operation FBI DOJ, and beneath it a smaller label almost clinical in its neutrality: confidential, not for civilian distribution. Ben took a breath that didn't quite land. Kyle meanwhile crowed on, emboldened by his ignorance. You think some government logo is going to scare me? He scoffed. This ain't a war room. This is cosplay. Monica stepped forward now, not fast, not aggressive, but with the weight of inevitability. Every word you speak, she said quietly, is a signature on your indictment. Kyle turned to her, still riding the high of defiance. You want to threaten me in your own home. Bold move. I'm not threatening you, Monica replied. I'm documenting your fall. Kyle's hand moved again to the cabinet, and Monica stepped closer, not to block him, but to make the choices in front of her, in front of the lens, in front of a system she hadn't even begun to activate. But he wasn't paying attention. His ego was louder than her warning. He reached forward, shoved the flashlight against the lock, and braced to pry, then took a step back. Monica didn't touch that, and you'll move from misconduct to criminal intent. Kyle shot her a look soaked in contempt. You can keep naming laws. Sweetheart, I'm the one with the badge, and soon that badge will be evidence. He swung the flashlight, the metal clanking uselessly against the lock. He turned frustrated, and that's when she moved, not to interfere, not to block, but simply to step between him and the document left carelessly on the desk. The shift was small, a matter of inches. But for a man already unstable, it was enough. Kyle lashed out with his arm. Not a punch, not yet, but a violent shove of her shoulder. Enough to jolt her back a half step. It was meant to intimidate. It did the opposite. Monica straightened instantly, her voice colder than before, but quieter, too, like a whisper carved from stone. You just put your hands on me without a warrant, she said. Which means the next time your name appears in court, your uniform will be in an evidence bag. Ben closed his eyes just for a second because he felt a tooth weight. The turning, the slow but undeniable tilt of the power in the room. Kyle, breathing heavy now, muttered, "She's playing us." "No," Monica said. "I'm not playing. I'm recording. I'm remembering. I'm preparing." The room wasn't just a space anymore. It was a witness, and it had long memories. Ben tried again weakly. Maybe we should just, but Kyle's pride was louder than reason. We came this far. We're not leaving until we know what she's hiding. Monica moved to the side, never turning her back on them. The only thing I'm hiding is the proof of how this all began, but it won't be hidden for long. Kyle's face twisted, a mix of rage and disbelief. You think this ends with you looking smug on a couch? You think some paperwork and big words are going to erase what we saw in that call? No, Monica said, stepping toward the desk and sliding the binder gently closed. This doesn't end here. It begins here, and the next pages, those, won't be written by you. Behind her, the camera light blinked once. Read, recording. Ben turned to leave. Kyle didn't. But somewhere in the hum of that locked cabinet, in the quiet hiss of circuits embedded in walls, in the thin air of a room meant for strategy and secrets, something had already opened. Not a drawer, not a door, a file, a fuse, a future, And none of them knew how loud it would get when silence finally exploded. The weight of what Kyle had touched, both physically and metaphorically still, hung in the air like static before a storm. The room hadn't moved, but something inside it had shifted irrevocably. Monica stepped away from the closed binder, her expression unreadable, her pace unrushed. She moved not like someone retreating, but like someone positioning herself for the next phase of something already in motion. Her presence wasn't large, but it was absolute. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached for a phone on the console table beside the wall. It wasn't her cell. It wasn't decorative. It was institutional, flat black, corded, functional, with a motion so precise it almost felt ritualistic. Monica lifted the receiver, dialed 3 numbers in sequence, waited a breath, and then delivered only 3 words. "They're inside." Logged. She placed the handset back into its cradle without looking at it, as if the action completed something ceremonial. A quiet exhale followed, not exhaustion, not anxiety, but calibration, as if some internal system had just locked into perfect alignment. She turned back to face the 2 men, her posture unaltered, her gaze sharper than before. Kyle laughed, but this time the sound cracked halfway through. "Was that supposed to scare us?" he said, though the rasp in his voice betrayed him. Monica said nothing. Kyle lunged forward, snatching the phone off the table, pressing it to his ear. Nothing but a soft dial tone and a mechanical click. As the line reset itself, he slammed it back into place harder than necessary, turning to her with a snarl. "Who the hell did you just call?" Her answer came slowly, evenly. "The people who don't ask questions before watching." Ben looked at her, then really looked, his pupils narrowing like a man finally seeing a tiger where he thought he'd seen a shadow. Why aren't you scared?" he asked, genuinely confused. There was no mockery in his voice, just the disorientation of someone who realized he was standing on a landmine painted to look like marble. Monica met his eyes. "Because I've already been here. This moment, this room, these assumptions. You think it's new because it's happening to you." She glanced at Kyle. "But I've survived this scene more times than you've read a warrant." Kyle scoffed, louder now, desperate to claw back some footing. "She's playing mind games. That's all this is. Smoke and mirrors." "I don't play," Monica said, the words landing like ice on the back of the neck. "I warn, and when I warn, I record." The air stiffened. A digital chime sounded faintly from somewhere in the ceiling. Kyle flinched, then turned, and Monica remained. Still, the sound was subtle, almost pleasant, an innocuous beep, but it didn't come from a microwave or a phone or any household appliance. It was from a system, a protocol, a notification perhaps, or a timestamp. Ben whispered mostly to himself. "She's not bluffing." Kyle snapped, "Shut up." Monica's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the cool satisfaction of someone whose dominoes had begun to fall exactly as placed. "Every step you took, every word you said, every assumption you met, it's all logged. I told you that when I let you in." Kyle moved forward again, his posture aggressive but less confident. "You didn't let us in. We entered under suspicion of trespassing, and now you've crossed into confirmed trespass without consent, without cause, in possession of and in contact with restricted material while being observed, while being archived. You didn't just enter a house, you entered a network." Ben looked at Kyle and for the first time, his face asked a silent question. What if she's telling the truth? Kyle saw it and it enraged him. "You're letting her mess with your head," he spat. "You think she's got a CIA bunker in the ceiling." "She didn't flinch when you pushed her," Ben said quietly. "She didn't flinch when you opened that binder. Hell, she didn't flinch when you ignored her rights in her own house." Monica's voice sliced in again. Sharp. Exact, because I don't negotiate with denial. I document it. Kyle turned back to her, jaw clenched. "This is intimidation, pure and simple." "No," Monica said. "It's insurance. You just walked into a fire thinking it was a fireplace. Now every time you breathe, the smoke's getting logged. The lights overhead flickered once. Just a shimmer, not a power failure. More like a shift in current, something recalibrating. Kyle noticed. Ben noticed. Kyle's voice rose tight with strain. You think anyone's going to care about a call from a woman crying racism in her mansion? You still think this is about race, she said. It's about proof, and you've given it willingly. Ben rubbed his temples. What kind of call only needs 3 words? Monica tilted her head. The kind that doesn't explain, it activates. Kyle's eyes darted toward the hallway, toward the street, toward the door, as if he'd suddenly remembered the world outside this house might be watching, might already be moving. She's bluffing, he muttered again. But this time, it wasn't directed at anyone but himself. Monica stepped closer, not in challenge, in clarity. You'd think you're wolves, trained, armed, free to hunt. But you forgot some homes are not the forest. They're traps, and you just triggered the mechanism. The phone behind her chimed again, not a ring. A system tone. Confirmation? Kyle stared at it, then at her. What the hell's going on here? Monica didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the living room where the camera embedded in the ceiling, turned ever so slightly, automated, not intrusive, but focused. She spoke softly, not for the officers, but for the lens. Document entry. 1643. Unauthorized. Logged. Physical contact initiated. Evidence cabinet accessed. Ben stepped back instinctively. Jesus Christ. Kyle lunged again, hands reaching for her shoulder. A desperate, reckless grab for control. She stood still, arms at her sides, letting him do what he was already being recorded doing. She spoke without moving her head. Touch me again, and the system won't need me to testify. You'll already be a case study. Kyle stepped back, face red with confusion, fear, and rage, all masquerading as disdain. You've made your point. No, Monica said. You made it. I just framed it. Outside, a sound faint as thunder rumbled. It wasn't thunder, but they wouldn't understand that yet. The air was no longer heavy. It was sharp. Every molecule between Monica and the 2 men in her house now cut with precision. Silent blades pressing into the space they thought they controlled. Kyle still posturing, still wearing the pretense of authority like a frayed uniform, paced with more force than purpose. But with every step he took, the room seemed to resist him. It didn't obey his presence. It observed it. Monica stood centered, motionless, her silence louder than any siren, her stillness more commanding than any raised weapon. She didn't glare. She didn't gloat. She simply remained unmoving, unnerved, undeniable. And it was that lack of fear, that unyielding calm, that chipped away at Kyle's performance faster than any protest ever could. Ben lingered in the doorway of the office turn trap, his fingers twitching at his side, his breath unsteady. He stared toward the ceiling, squinting into the recessed corner of the room, and saw it lens faintly mirrored, tucked into the molding, quietly blinking. Not theatrical, not obvious, but real, very real. Is that Ben's voice cracked like a boy's, not a man's? Is that a hidden camera in the corner? Does it see my face? Does it see me? He looked at Monica with a wide-eyed tension that bordered on panic. She didn't nod. She didn't speak. Her answer was embedded in her expression, an elegant refusal to soothe him. Kyle scoffed with the kind of contempt only ignorance can summon. You can't sue someone for a stare, he said, half to himself, half to her, trying to stitch authority back into his unraveling tone. You weren't touched. You weren't hurt. You can't sue. If nobody hits you. Monica turned her head slowly, just enough to face him directly. Her voice, when it came, wasn't cold, it was glacial. Sometimes being seen as less human, less deserving, less real, that is violence. Sometimes the bruise is just deeper than skin. Kyle laughed, but it broke before it finished. Spare me the sociology degree. Sweetheart, You brought your gun, she said. But I brought history, and it remembers better than you lie. Ben took a slow step backward, bumping into the edge of a side table. He didn't correct his posture. He just stayed there as if keeping distance might undo what he now realized he had stepped into. Kyle slammed his palm against the coffee table. The noise echoed, but even that felt small. You're manipulating this. You're trying to twist this into something it's not. You're playing us. Monica's expression didn't change. Not 1 degree number. I'm refusing to be reduced by you. Kyle's breathing had changed faster, shorter, as if his lungs were catching up to the danger. His mind still refused to name. The silence wasn't cooperating. The walls weren't giving. The woman in front of him wasn't folding. He stepped forward again, shoulders high, fists flexing at his sides. You think just because you live in a fancy house and throw around a few statutes, you're untouchable. I think, Monica replied, that I've spent years watching men like you believe you are. Ben sat down suddenly as if the gravity of the room had increased. He looked at the camera again. They see us, all of this. It's recording us right now, isn't it? Monica didn't answer. She didn't need to. The camera's slow. Silent Pivot spoke on her behalf. Kyle turned toward Ben, frustration boiling. Don't let her get in your head. She's just sitting there staring like she owns the damn system. She might, Ben muttered. She might be the system. Kyle turned back to Monica, hatred simmering behind his eyes now. You want to play revolution. You want to push this like you're some kind of hero. I'm not a hero, she said. I'm just tired of dying quietly. Ben whispered. What are we even doing here? And that was the question, the unspoken admission, the realization that neither of them was ready to face when they stepped through that door with swagger and suspicion. They were no longer policing. They were being witnessed. Kyle clenched his jaw, looking around for something ending that might let him retake control. But the room had gone still. No ambient noise. No allies. Just men surrounded by their misconduct being etched into evidence 1 silent second at a time. Monica walked to the arm of the sofa and sat down gracefully, deliberately, not to concede, to reclaim. Her voice was soft now, surgical. The danger isn't that you thought I didn't belong. It's that you believed it so fully. You acted without fear of being wrong. Kyle shook his head like trying to scatter her words before they planted too deep. This won't hold. A camera won't save you. I don't need saving, she said. I need proof. You provided it. He growled through his teeth like the weight of what she was implying crushed his last illusion of control. You're playing this like a lawyer. Correction, she said. I'm playing this like someone who read the manual before they broke into the courtroom. Ben closed his eyes again. The realization was full now. They hadn't walked into a house. They had stepped into a case. File already halfway written. Kyle slumped against the back of a chair, like a boxer, still standing, but long since beaten. This isn't how this is supposed to go. Monica's eyes met his one last time. It's exactly how it's supposed to go. Han. The system watches back. The silence that had wrapped itself around Kyle like a vice was no longer empty. It was waiting. And Kyle, too full of rage to read the room, chose to fill that silence, the only way he knew how, by pushing further into destruction. His eyes, burning with wounded pride, landed once again on the cabinet Monica had warned him to touch. He saw the file left partially ajar marked, with caution, sealed in restraint, and mistook its stillness for weakness. In one sudden, graceless movement, he reached forward, gripped the topmost folder, and yanked. The paper tore like skin, loud, violent, unfixable. It was a sound that didn't just interrupt the moment, rewrote it. A corner of the page, once protected under federal grade tape, now dangled in his hand, ripped at the seal. On it, printed in black letters with all the subtlety of a loaded weapon, was a name, Deputy Director Thomas Beckford. Internal Affairs. Ben froze, not metaphorically. His entire body locked in place as if the words had paralyzed his spine. The Color drained from his face, not because he understood everything, but because he understood enough. That name wasn't a guess, it wasn't a bluff. It was a ceiling-level security clearance with enough weight to collapse careers, departments, and entire precincts. And they just torn into it like kids rifling through someone else's birthday mail. Kyle didn't stop. He stared at the name, then at Monica, and then he laughed, a hollow defensive sound. More fear than amusement. "This is staged," he muttered. "Fake. Anyone with Photoshop can slap a name on a file." Ben didn't move. Kyle shook the folder like it might shake off the truth. "You expect me to believe your husband is some hotshot Fed? That you're married to a damn deputy director?" His voice cracked on the word director, as if his throat didn't quite believe it. Monica, still standing in the same place as before, didn't step forward. She didn't raise her voice. She simply breathed, and then let the words fall with the weight of a gavel. "You just tore open your indictment." Kyle's hands clenched around the torn document like he could crumple it into fiction. "Nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to believe a woman who baits cops with her decor." Monica blinked once slowly. "I don't need belief. I only need visibility. The system doesn't work on trust. It works on proof, and you just gave it yours." Ben turned toward her now for the first time. Not as a threat, but as a man trying to make sense of the ledge beneath his feet. "Your husband is Thomas Beckford." Monica's eyes didn't soften. "That's what the folder says, doesn't it?" Ben dropped the file as if it had burned. Kyle stepped forward, trying to find one last thread of dominance in the tapestry unraveling in front of him. "He's not here now, is he? And even if he was, what's he going to doubt? Write a report?" Monica tilted her head. "Number he'll open a case." Kyle's face twisted with disbelief, frustration, and something he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now, fear. Ben ran a hand down his face, fingers trembling. "Jesus, I know that name. He's not just the Doge, he's internal affairs. He doesn't review incident. She ends careers." Monica didn't smile. That would have been mercy. She stayed perfectly composed, perfectly still. "Now you understand why I didn't shout. Why didn't I resist? Why did I let you touch what you thought was yours?" Kyle's voice turned vicious. "So, this was a setup?" "No," Monica replied. "This was an opportunity. You made it a confession." Ben staggered back a step. He looked at the room again, as if seeing it for the first time as a space to control, but a witness to everything they'd done. The rug under his boots, the lens in the ceiling, the untouched binder now torn like a body, and Monica unmoved at the center of it all. Kyle sneered. "This won't stick." Monica's voice was quieter now, but sharper than glass. "It won't need to. You already did." Ben picked up the torn folder again, hands careful now, reverent. He looked at the seal, the classification stamps, and the signatures. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. "It never is," Monica said. "That's the problem." He looked at her, his voice cracking under the weight of his next question. "Who are you?" Her response came without hesitation. "I'm the consequence." The name hung in the room like a silent detonation. Thomas Beckford, but the true shock hadn't arrived yet. It came not with sirens or shouts, not with a warrant or a gun drawn, but in the form of a vehicle, a presence so precise, so absolute it didn't need to explain itself. Outside, the deep hum of a high-performance engine drew nearer, a black SUV, unmarked, tinted, governmentist, coasted to a stop at the curb like it belonged to gravity itself. Ben turned first. His eyes caught the silhouette through the bay window. The front of the SUV didn't flash lights or spin signals. It didn't need to. The vehicle exhaled authority. It declared control, not with noise, but with stillness. Kyle followed Ben's line of sight. He looked once, then twice. The blood drained from his face like ink spilling on white linen. "No," he murmured. "Number, that's not Monica." Still poised, still untouched, returned to her chair in the living room as though she were merely resuming a paused afternoon. She lifted her teacup from the saucer with the elegance of routine, not spectacle. The faint clink of porcelain whispered through the air like punctuation. Ben blinked hard. That's a government vehicle. Kyle backed away from the window, a hollow echo in his voice. This isn't happening. That can't be real. It is, Monica said, setting the saucer back down, her tone soft but sharpened with intention. And now you'll see who gives orders in my house. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. No badge, no uniform, no armor. Just a suit, tailored, silent, and unbending. He didn't look around. He didn't scan for danger. He didn't need to. The world had already adjusted to his presence. Every step he took toward the house wasn't a walk. It was a verdict approaching its sentence. Kyle stepped back instinctively, but Monica never turned. She didn't need to look. She knew the rhythm of those footsteps. She knew their weight and the weight they carried. Thomas Beckford entered the house without knocking. He didn't hesitate. The door wasn't locked. Nothing was locked, not when the house was never his to break into, but his to reclaim. His eyes found Kyle first. No expression. Just recognition of behavior, of trajectory, of mistake. Ben froze. Oh my God, that's him, Kyle stammered. He can't just walk in. There's no jurisdiction. There's jurisdiction, Thomas said, his voice calm, carrying no need to raise its volume. Thomas Beckford, Deputy Director, Department of Justice, Internal Affairs Division. He reached into the breast pocket of his blazer, pulled out a sleek, leather ID holder, and flipped it open. The emblem flashed. No gold plating, no fanfare, just the truth, laminated and irrefutable. Kyle's mouth moved, but made no sound. Monica raised her cup, took a small sip of her now lukewarm tea, and spoke like it was any other Sunday afternoon. I told you from the beginning. I don't need to yell. Thomas stepped forward. Now, between his wife and the two men who had believed themselves untouchable, he didn't need to raise a hand. His presence did all the lifting. Ben lowered his gaze like a child caught cheating on a test. Sir, we didn't know. We thought you thought wrong, Thomas said. You assumed wrong and you acted on that assumption in a way that puts you under formal review from this moment forward. Kyle's breathing was shallow. He looked around, searching for an exit that no longer existed. This is Ian Teacherment, he spat. She set us up. She opened her door. Thomas replied. You kicked your way through it. Monica didn't speak. She didn't need to anymore. Her job was done. The transition of power had already taken place, and she had orchestrated it with the grace of someone who didn't need to swing a sword to win a war. Thomas looked down at the torn folder on the floor. Classified documents, mishandled, removed from containment by officers without clearance. That's not entrapment, that's incompetence. Kyle's fists clenched at his sides, the last vestige of a man realizing his rage was no longer a weapon. It was a weakness. Ben shifted toward the door. Serta can explain everything. I've seen everything, Thomas said, nodding toward the lens overhead. You're not here to explain, you're here to account. A long pause filled the room. No one moved. The only sound was the ticking of a silent clock that had up until now belonged to Monica alone. She set her cup down one final time. The click of ceramic on wood echoed like the last stone laid on a sealed tomb. I warned you, she said, her voice light, almost tender, and I always record my warnings. The moment was still, not quiet, just still, a deceptive kind of stillness, like the surface of deep water before something breaks through. Thomas Beckford stood centered in the room, the silence bending around him as if even sound obeyed his presence. Monica hadn't moved from her seat. She hadn't spoken again. She didn't need to. The power shift had already taken hold. All that remained was for the system to formalize what she'd already dismantled. Kyle, trapped between disbelief and desperation, shook his head slowly. His breath came uneven now, like something inside him had stopped syncing with the world outside. You can't do this, he barked, reaching for whatever scraps of procedural confidence he still had left. This isn't protocol. Thomas turned to him without blinking. You access classified DOJ property without a warrant. You laid hands on a federal civilian without consent. You interfered with internal materials related to active federal operations. There's no gray area here, only record. Kyle's jaw locked, his hands twitched, his voice dropped into a rasp. This was a setup. She lured us into this from the couch. Monica finally spoke, calm, precise. You walked in. I didn't stop you. That's not entrapment. That's gravity. Before Kyle could speak again, Thomas raised one hand not to strike, not to gesture, but as a cue in behind him. A second later, the back door clicked open. Two agents stepped in, silent, suited, not theatrical. They didn't need to be. They were the system in motion, professional, practiced, inevitable. Kyle took a step back, fists clenched. Don't touch, Emmy. But he didn't finish the sentence. One of the agents moved with mechanical precision, twisting Kyle's arm in a practiced grip, guiding him down to his knees before he even understood what was happening. His shout became a grunt, his body folding in on itself like a structure stripped of scaffolding. Thomas remained still. Temporary federal detainment authorized under emergency jurisdiction of internal affairs. Kyle thrashed once, only once. You have no cause. I have the recording, Thomas said flatly. I have your voice, your actions. Your fingerprints are on restricted files. You gave me cause the moment you mistook your badge for a shield. From across the room, a noise broke the air. A phone, not a ringtone. A secure low chime vibrating from Ben Lasker's hip radio. He stared at it like it might explode. He lifted it with shaking fingers, pressed it to his ear. Lasker? Yes. Yes. I'm inside now. His eyes widened. He looked at Thomas, then Monica, then back to the floor. Yes, sir. I understand. Confirmed? Yes. She was present. Yes. Cameras. No, I didn't know. Monica sipped her tea again, as if nothing around her required a response. Ben lowered the phone slowly. That was internal oversight. They've been listening, watching from the beginning. Monica met his eyes. Not watching, verifying. You're not being followed. You're being authenticated. Ben turned white. This can't be real. Thomas didn't move. It's not just real. It's policy. Kyle, now fully restrained, snarled through clenched teeth. You set me up. You manipulated everything. Monica didn't even look at him. A number. You brought yourself here. All I did was leave the door unlocked. Thomas looked toward the agents. Effective immediately. Federal temporary custody. Hold for DOJ procedural audit. Any protest or resistance constitutes obstruction under 18 U.S. Code Section 155. Ben took one slow step back, then another. Wait, am I included in this? Thomas's tone didn't shift. That depends. Did you touch anything unauthorized? Did you act beyond your mandate? Ben nodded slowly. Yes, but I didn't know. I followed him. He was the lead. Monica turned her head slightly. Her voice was soft, but her words landed hard. Following orders doesn't absolve responsibility. It merely traces it. Ben's hands fell to his sides. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It always goes this far, she said. You just never notice until the footage replays. One of the agents stepped toward Kyle, who now sat cuffed, breathing hard, eyes darting around the room like he might still find an escape hatch hidden behind logic. There was none. Thomas addressed the room now, not loud, but final. This property is now considered an active federal evidence zone. All actions occurring within this perimeter are under DOJ review. You are not suspects, you are data points, and the data is already written. Monica placed her cup down once more, slowly and deliberately told you I didn't need to yell. The agents didn't smile, they didn't speak. They simply moved, efficient and silent, the living hands of a system that hadn't needed to rush, because justice didn't sprint. It waited and then it landed like a hammer, then turned back toward the doorway numb. He looked once more at Monica as if seeking some flicker of absolution. She gave him none, not cruelty, just completion. Thomas gave one final order. Take him. Secure all evidence. No statement needed. The house has already testified. The sound of the handcuffs closing around Kyle's wrists was quiet, too quiet for the weight it carried. It didn't echo across the room, didn't shatter glass or stir wind, but it landed with more force than any gavel. There was no shouting, no dragging, no fight left in him, just a man kneeling in the middle of a house he thought he could violate, now subdued not by force, but by something far crueler. Witness truth. Ben sank into the nearest armchair like gravity had tripled its pull. His knees gave out before his conscience could catch up. He sat there numb, hands limp at his sides, eyes unfocused. The room hadn't changed, but it had. Somehow the floor was firmer, the walls more rigid, the air heavier. The illusion had shattered, and in its place stood something unshakable: accountability. Monica rose from her seat without drama, without sound, her chair barely whispered against the polished wood floor as she stood. She didn't look at Kyle. She didn't look at Ben. She didn't need to. She simply turned, walked toward the wide glass doors that opened onto the balcony, and stepped into the afternoon light as if walking out of a courtroom she never needed to enter. The sun hit her cream blouse with a softness that made the room behind her seem colder by contrast, her silhouette framed against the sky, posture tall, arms by her sides not raised, not defensive, just still watching, absorbing, declaring victory without a word. Kyle, still on his knees, cuffed and panting, tried one last strike. His voice shook, but the venom still clung to it. "You'll pay for this," he growled, "for humiliating a police officer, for making a joke out of the badge." Thomas didn't move. His voice didn't spike. He just answered like a surgeon, stating facts mid-operation. "You're not a police officer. You're a liability. And we were created to clean up men like you." Monica didn't react. Her silence was a verdict more powerful than any sentence. Kyle spat on the floor. "This is political." Monica, still facing the light, replied in a tone that didn't seek to debate. "This is structural." Ben's eyes filled without warning. He blinked once, then again. The tears didn't fall out of grief or guilt, but something deeper: recognition of the truth, of the cost of himself. "I'm sorry," he said. Voice raw, eyes on her back, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know. I didn't think." Monica didn't turn. She didn't nod. She didn't forgive. She let the silence do what it always had: speak, louder than anything he could say. Behind her, the agents moved with quiet precision. Kyle was lifted, escorted, not manhandled, but not respected. He was no longer a figure of law. He was an entry in a report, a mistake to be catalogued. Thomas gave one last glance at the house before following. He didn't need to say anything more. His presence had done the talking. His steps out the front door felt less like an exit and more like a seal being pressed into the wax of history. Inside, the teacup sat untouched now, the steam long faded, the porcelain cold. But it wasn't abandoned. It had served its purpose. It had been the witness, the constant, the unshaken participant in every legal step, every raised voice, every unlawful gesture. It had heard Kyle's arrogance. It had seen Ben's doubt, and it had reflected Monica's calm in every ripple of liquid. That cup had become the witness stand, that room, the courtroom, that woman, the judge. Neither man expected, and both now answered to the house didn't need to be cleaned. It had already been purified, not by hands, not by bleach, but by exposure. What was vile had walked in wearing a badge. What was just had sat still, poured tea, and waited. Outside, the sound of the SUV's door closing was soft, almost like a bow being tied at the end of a gift. Except this gift had sharp corners and federal jurisdiction. Ben remained seated, eyes glassy. He looked once more at Monica, still unmoving, still backlit by gold sunlight. He wanted her to speak, to say it was okay, to say he could fix this, but Monica didn't speak. She didn't absolve. She didn't turn. She left the apology exactly where it belonged, dangling between failure and realization. Inside that house, there was no blood, no shattered glass, no smoke, and yet, justice had happened. Not in the form of noise, not in the form of violence, but in the form of presence. Monica didn't fight them, she received them. And the system finally saw her doing it. The doors closed behind Thomas and his agents, but Monica remained on the balcony, letting the sunlight settle into the fibers of her blouse like a slow, deliberate breath. The wind moved faintly through the curtains as if even nature had agreed. It was over, but only the first act. Inside, the air hadn't cooled, it had crystallized. The weight of what had happened didn't fade with the handcuffs. It thickened, rooted itself in the architecture of the home, and burned itself into every surface the two officers had touched. The reckoning hadn't ended, it had just begun. Kyle and Ben were not taken away. Not yet. They were ordered to remain inside the perimeter, under federal detention at the scene of the offense. This wasn't about hauling criminals away to cells. This was about turning the crime scene itself into a statement, into an indictment, into proof. Monica stepped back inside. She walked slowly without urgency, like time itself now answered to her. She didn't speak. She didn't look at the two men still seated. Kyle cuffed, Ben slouched in defeat. Her attention went to the table. She set her teacup down, not for ceremony, but for placement. Then she reached into the drawer of a side cabinet and pulled out a simple white cloth. With elegant precision, she wiped the surface of the glass coffee table. Not the whole thing, just one specific spot. The exact place where Kyle's palm had slammed earlier in fury. She didn't speak a word. The gesture said it all. Memory now had a shine. Moments later, the sound of polished shoes against stone tile announced the arrival of more agents. DOJ flagged. Silent, exacting, they filed in without a rush, equipped, not with weapons, but with cases, scanners, cameras, and gloves. Their movements weren't theatrical, they were procedural, purposeful. Thomas walked in behind them, already issuing instructions. Collect all surface fingerprints, tabletop, sofa, armrests, file cabinet handles, door frames, keypads. Confirm video timestamps with physical presence. One of the agents moved toward the camera monitor in the corner of the room, pulling the feed. The screens blinked to life, angles rotating to display every move made inside the house. For the last 2 hours, Kyle shifted in his seat, mouth tight, watching his own mistakes replay on loop. Ben turned away. He couldn't bear to see himself caught in the Firmino just as a participant, but as a witness who didn't stop it. Thomas turned toward them without raising his voice. Fingerprint, voice print, biometric scan. Everything is admissible, every angle preserved, every second is time-stamped. We are not building a case. You already built it. We are preserving the ruins. Ben tried to recover what little he could of his dignity. We were following protocol. A call came in. Thomas cut him off without raising his tone, and now we are following the law. The agent spread across the room like a truth-seeking swarm. Nothing was missed. A gloved hand lifted the binder Kyle had torn. Another scanned the edge of the drawer where Ben had rested his palm. A third collected trace fiber from the rug's edge just in case. Monica remained silent, but she moved through the space with the quiet dignity of someone whose house had become hallowed. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to demand. Her very existence in the room ensured that every step they took was precise. No shouting, no escalation. This wasn't a raid, it was an audit. A judgment rendered not by jury, but by architecture and code. The lead forensics agent approached Thomas. We're ready for the on-site order if you want to formalize it now. Thomas gave a short nod. Prepare the printer. From a hard case, a portable DOJ credential unit was assembled, compact, digital, connected directly to the AY's mainframe. Thomas opened a secure line, input credentials, and began issuing the order. And then, for the first time since her warning hours earlier, Monica spoke. Use my system access. My credentials are already cached. I'll sign it. Thomas didn't question her. He simply turned the screen. She walked over, scanning the form, not because she didn't trust it, but because she respected it. She placed her finger on the biometric scanner. The machine beeped once. Her name appeared at the bottom of the document. Monica Beckford, Federal Internal Systems Advisor. The title didn't need to be read aloud. Everyone in the room saw it. Thomas glanced toward the two men. You entered the home of a federal advisor, mishandled classified content, ignored verbal legal warnings, interfered with federal evidence. That's not misconduct, that's a pattern. Ben couldn't look up. I didn't know, Thomas answered coldly. And that's the most dangerous thing about your kind of ignorance, said always finds a badge. Monica placed the signed order into the evidence folder herself. Her touch was steady, symbolic, not as a victim, as an author. Kyle still had venom left, but it came out in broken form. You think this makes you a hero? Monica didn't even turn. It doesn't make me anything, but it finally makes you visible. One of the agents handed the folder to Thomas, who sealed it without flourish. The printer beeped again, and a second copy was filed into the room's portable archive. The operation was surgical, clean, swift. Justice, it turned out, wasn't always loud. It didn't always bang on doors or flash in red and blue. Sometimes it walked into a living room, sat down a case, and wrote its name in silence. The silence that had once dominated Monica's living room now echoed into government offices, newsrooms, legal departments, and precincts across the country. It began not with a speech or press release, but with a file. Precise, formal, lethal. Monica Beckford submitted an individual civil complaint neatly filed under her name, accompanied by a single postscript. I have a recording, but I don't need it to prove the truth. No italics, no bold typeface, just plain text sharp enough to puncture the illusion of innocence. The moment that file entered the federal system, it didn't move. It detonated. What was labeled a single claim of unlawful entry and racial profiling was in reality a spark deliberately aimed at the kindling of decades-long rot. Monica hadn't filed a complaint. She had uncapped a reservoir of every unchecked slight, every buried report, every cover-up that had been dismissed with the word inconclusive. Within 48 hours, an internal review was launched, not by suggestion, but by obligation. The complaint had cited constitutional violations under Title 42, U.S.C. Parts 1983, naming officers Kyle Redford and Ben Lasker. Specifically, the DOJ couldn't ignore it. Not because of her title, but because of her precision. Because everything had already been time-stamped, authenticated, and mirrored. The review process didn't uncover a misstep. It uncovered a pattern, the kind that institutions whisper about, but never name, until now. Kyle Redford's personnel file, once buried beneath bureaucratic insulation, was forcibly re-examined. The surface cracked first. 3 prior complaints since 2016, each dismissed, due to insufficient corroboration. But this time, the dismissals were re-evaluated under a new directive. When silence is used as a shield, re-listen for what it covered. The contents made it into an internal memo marked sensitive integrity division only. One report detailed Kyle drawing his weapon during a routine traffic stop on a black teenager for suspicious posture. Another included audio of him laughing while describing a suspect as background furniture. A third had already been uploaded anonymously online, this time, not by activists, but by a whistleblower within the department itself. And then came Ben Laser, not as overt, not as brash, but no less indictable. A cache of internal messages from the department's messaging system was decrypted and traced to his login. For messages, all within the last 2 years, laced with racial slurs disguised as jokes. One included a gif of a woman with dark skin being mocked by a cartoon emoji in a police cap. The caption read, "When affirmative action forgets the action." Another included a meme with a burning police station and the tag, "When the locals do community engagement." None of these were public before, but they were archived, and some group had waited for a reason to leak them. Monica's complaint was the trigger. The leak appeared first on a mid-size digital watchdog site known for publishing politically sensitive information. Within hours, it exploded across platforms. Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, even LinkedIn with a different spin, but the same fuel. Screenshots were captioned not with outrage, but with clarity. They didn't mistake her for a suspect. They assumed she couldn't be sovereign. These aren't anomalies. These are standard operating behaviors until someone watches. She didn't need to speak. She became proof. The backlash wasn't loud. It was surgical. One major network aired a 15-minute expose titled "The Complaint That Wasn't Alone," anchored by a respected legal journalist. The piece chronicled how systemic rot hides behind routine discretion and how Kyle and Ben were only the tip of a submerged legal iceberg. A Pulitzer-winning columnist wrote in her op-ed, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the system's blood pressure." Within days, an internal affairs investigator confirmed under oath that Kyle's previous complaints had been flagged, but were deprioritized to a combination of internal reputational optics and insufficient media pressure. The phrase was replayed on loop in late-night commentary. Insufficient media pressure became the new euphemism for "we don't care until they force us." But it wasn't just news, it was culture. People began screen printing Monica's quote on canvas tote bags, laptop stickers, and protest signs. "I don't need a recording. I need you to finally look." A high-profile criminal defense attorney tweeted, "She used the law like a blade, and now the blood's on everyone's desk." Meanwhile, Kyle and Ben remained under federal investigation. But what bled faster than legal consequences was reputation. Law school forums began dissecting the complaint in real time. Public defenders rewrote training slides. One major law firm used the case to revise its internal mentorship policies, citing Beckford versus Redford as a live case reference point. A respected civil rights professor stated on air, "This isn't about her words, it's about her silence and how long it made the room stay still." And Monica, she didn't do interviews. She didn't tweet. She didn't attend rallies. Her only public response was the original filing. Yet, her presence infected every policy meeting, every headline, every corporate apology. The police department, once the epicenter of the incursion, issued a statement regretting the breach of protocol, but the public wasn't looking for regret. They were watching for confession, and they didn't get it. Instead, what they got was exposure. Exposure so thorough it forced state auditors to open a broader inquiry into racial bias within procedural policing across for precincts. Starting with Monica's audit wasn't initiated by activists, it was initiated by pressure from corporate legal sponsors. Terrified of being next, because Monica hadn't just made it about her case, she made it about the others they assumed would never get one. Every leaked document, every archived message, every resurfaced reported, it all felt too clean to be accidental. As if the system itself had grown tired of lying for the same men. As if the database had finally decided to stop deleting in silence. And in the end, no apology was issued to Monica Beckford. Not because she didn't deserve one, but because no one dared pretend that one would be enough. The video didn't open with chaos. No flashing lights, no screaming, no violence, just Monica standing still in the center of her living room, flanked by two officers in uniform who were no longer in control of anything. The silence of the frame hit harder than any gunshot. Her posture was unshaken, her gaze unwavering, eyes, like polished obsidian, locked first onto Kyle, then slowly turning to the concealed camera above the mantel. There were no words, But there was a declaration. Not of anger, not of fear, just existence. An undeniable refusal to be erased. 57 seconds. That's all it was, a raw clip. No music, no edits, no filters, just the truth, in a digital world bloated with noise. The quiet of Monica's stare became the loudest scream of the year. Within hours, the footage exploded across social platforms. 30 million views in less than 48 hours. Hashtags erupted like wildfire. Memes multiplied. The same caption reappeared on every remix, every shared post, every article headline. She didn't need to scream. The reactions came not just from the streets, but from deep inside institutions. A former FBI agent tweeted, "That's not the look of a victim, that's the look of a system awakening inside one person." Officers in precincts from coast to coast sat in training rooms, watching the clip replayed on screens larger than life, dissecting each breath, each micro-expression, trying to understand how their kind had misread so profoundly. But there was no interpretation needed. It was all there. Her silence said everything. Kyle, now in a holding cell, couldn't escape it. The moment he turned on a television, scrolled through a feed, or overheard a conversation, he was confronted by the one image he couldn't burn down. Monica's eyes, staring through the lens, threw him through every badge like his. He threw a chair across his interrogation room, screamed into the walls, punched steel until his knuckles broke. But none of that noise could smother the fact that she had defeated him with silence, that she had unmade his authority not with evidence or aggression, but with a look. Students began analyzing the video in classrooms. Law professors played it to initiate debates on power, perception, and institutional blindness. Civil rights groups downloaded the clip, looping it on projection walls during conferences. A movement unannounced formed around her stillness. Protesters didn't chant her name. They stood in silence for 57 seconds, raising 3 fingers in the air. One for the woman, one for the truth, one for what must never be ignored again. No speech Monica had ever given, no legal memo she might draft. Nothing could have delivered the message more effectively than that short, brutal, quiet video. And she had known it. She hadn't planned it, but she had allowed it. Allowed herself to remain a fixed point in the middle of a crumbling storm, allowed the cameras to witness not a meltdown, but an unbending refusal. The clip played on monitors in airports, in government buildings, even on screens in police meets. Kyle's name, though never spoken in the video, became synonymous with failure, with decay in the system, with everything a uniform should never represent. He begged his lawyer to file a gag order against the video. It was denied. He called the footage defamatory. The court responded, "It is not defamatory." To show the truth, as public outcry surged, people began researching Monica, but there was little to find. She didn't do interviews, didn't post explanations, didn't attend rallies. She did not need to chase the narrative. It had already been carved into the consciousness of a nation. Scholars called it the quietest revolution. Journalists named it the stare that changed everything. Behind every piece of commentary, there was only one constant: Monica's eyes, that impossible stillness, that fireless burn, that audacity to stand in silence and make the world listen. No slogans, no grand gestures, just the truth. Uncompromised, unspoken, unignored. And so the world didn't just hear her. It reminded her not as a symbol, not as a martyr, but as a mirror, reflecting every bias, every abuse, every silence that had once covered a scream. She never screamed, but she made sure they could never again pretend they didn't hear. The silence that had once held a room hostage now seeped into institutions like smoke under a locked door. While Monica Beckford had returned to her quiet home, the noise she didn't make became the one no one could silence. It began with a closed-door session at the State Ethics Oversight Board, hastily convened after the Department of Justice issued a preliminary inquiry into the precinct where Kyle Redford had once strutted like a king and borrowed robes. 11 officers, all from the same department, found themselves suspended under emergency review orders. Their names were flagged not by testimony, but by timestamps, camera footage, and archived complaints no one bothered to take seriously until now. Whispers turned into transcript. One of the lieutenants, once revered for keeping things clean and quiet, was subpoenaed for a 2019 decision that buried a use of force allegation under a pile of procedural jargon. Under oath, he broke. I was told to shut it down, that she wasn't just a civilian, that she had connections. His words unraveled more than the old file. It fractured the illusion of isolation. Monica hadn't been a lone voice. She had been the proof that silence doesn't mean powerlessness, it means preparation. An audio leak soon spread through news outlets and forums. It was a recording from an internal strategy meeting at Kyle's precinct captured on a device someone had forgotten. Was recording. In the tense half-muttered exchange, one voice barked, "Stop bringing up the Beckford case. She's not just some homeowner. She's a damn signal flare." The room fell dead after that sentence, just like the precinct's credibility. Monica, meanwhile, kept herself removed from the frenzy. A request to speak at the National Forum on Police Reform was politely declined with a hand-delivered note. "I've already spoken. You just need to listen." Her presence wasn't necessary. Her absence was louder. The image of her sipping tea, while armed men unraveled, still sat on desktops, training modules, and protest placards. It wasn't just iconic, it was forensic. Thomas Beckford, once a bulwark at the Department of Justice, filed for an indefinite leave of absence. The official statement read, "Personal reflection," but the unofficial narrative was simpler. He stepped aside so she could step forward not in speech, but in influence. Behind the scenes, she reviewed ethics revisions, consulted on misconduct, oversight, and greenlit policy drafts through silent digital initials, M. Beckford. As for Kyle, the name that once patrolled a city now echoed through HR bans and legal filings. A nationwide employment blacklist swept through public agencies, and his was the first flagged entry. Do not hire. Pending federal investigation. Ethics violation permanent. His name was now synonymous with a lesson, not a badge. Back on the street where it began, something curious happened. The house, Monica's house, was officially recognized as a protected historic site by the state's Cultural Preservation Council, not for its architecture, not for its age, but for its impact. A plaque was installed beside the gate, minimalist yet thunderous in its inscription, "This is where silence spoke louder than authority." Tourists came quietly, educators came with purpose, and students stood before the gate with phones in hand, whispering, not out of reverence, but recognition. They had seen the clip, they had shared the memes, and now they understood the weight of what wasn't said. Inside the house, Monica didn't redecorate. She didn't repaint. The shattered pretense still echoed faintly in the corners, but not as trauma's testimony. She wiped down the surface of the table one more time, tracing the outline of where Kyle's hand once slammed in arrogance, now reduced to a memory filed under evidence. Her silence remained unbroken, her presence remained unchallenged. And her house, once violated by force, now stood as a monument to restraint turned revolution. She hadn't burned anything down, she hadn't shouted, but somehow the whole system was in ashes. The plaque outside the house had only been there a week when the first letter came. A thick envelope creased at the corners bearing a return address, from the temporary holding facility in Sacramento. Monica opened it without ceremony, unfolded the pages and read. No change touched her face, no tremor touched her hands. It was written in longhand, the kind that clutched at redemption but stumbled through its shame. I believed the uniform was a shield Ben had written. I didn't know it was handcuffs I was putting on others. She read it once, folded it again, slipped it silently into a new envelope marked with the return address of his former precinct. There was no vindictiveness in the gesture, No theatrical act of vengeance. Only precision, truth filed and returned to sender. She included one sentence beneath the flap printed clean and flat. You apologize for what you did, but you never understood what you represented. The system responded without need of her need. His request for bail was denied. The phrasing of the court was surgical, brutal. Subject presents as high reputational risk to law enforcement integrity. The uniform Ben had once worn now served only to weigh his name down in ink. The clip went viral within hours. A local news camera caught the moment. Monica stood outside the courthouse as Ben was escorted out in cuffs. She did not turn away. She did not glare. She did not nod. She simply watched. And in that stillness, the world saw a mirror. Her gaze said what no protest ever could. This is what it feels like to be reduced to a suspect without a word spoken. No one watching mistook her silence for indifference. It was a statement. It was a judgment passed without trial, without jury, without a gavel, rendered only through the unwavering presence of someone who had already been wronged too many times to flinch. Journalists didn't ask for quotes. There was nothing to add. Analysts didn't try to spin it. There was nothing to clarify. The footage played on loops across every major outlet. One anchor summed it up perfectly. We've learned to fear yelling, but now we're learning to fear silence. Ben's letter found its way online, too. Inevitably, the public dissected it like a failed apology exam. Some praised the intent, most criticized the timing. The phrase about the uniform intended as self-reflection was repurposed into headlines that skewered the hollow ethos of policing shield or shackles. When the badge becomes a brand of ignorance, comment sections were merciless. Advocacy groups didn't quote the letter. They quoted Monica's envelope. You never understood what you represented. It became a protest slogan overnight. In private, Monica said nothing. She didn't respond to interview requests, invitations to panel discussions, or op-eds begging her to weigh in. Her restraint became its own form of leadership. Where others pontificated, she remained unshaken. Where others theorized, she acted only through unspoken consequences. Her name was spoken with reverence, not because of what she declared, but because of what she made undeniable. Ben, once a faceless badge among thousands, now had a face the public associated with failure, not just of action, but of recognition. It wasn't the brutality that convicted him, it was the blind obedience to prejudice. In the weeks that followed, fellow officers testified to a culture of nodding along, of silent complicity, and though no one blamed him alone, they all understood someone had to become the symbol. A teaching module was built around the footage of Monica's courthouse stare. Title: The Look That Convicted a Culture. Recruits sat through it in mandated silence. They weren't told who she was. They were only told to watch and understand. In classrooms across the country, students began to study the case not as a moment, but as a pivot. They didn't ask who was guilty. They asked, why didn't anyone stop it before it happened? Ben's face, frozen in shame as he exited court, became a chapter heading in new ethics curricula. And always, Monica stood at the periphery, never speaking, always present. In one photo, she was captured watching him through the tinted windows of the transport van. No expression, just a stillness that burned through glass. A caption under that image widely circulated read, "She did not forgive. She did not hate. She remembered." The world moved forward, but it carried her presence with it like a watermark pressed deep into new policy, new language, new silence. It was a single frame mounted without fanfare in the main lobby of the FBI headquarters. Monica stood centered in the photograph, her posture composed, calm, but commanding. Behind her, a torn federal file lay half exposed on a table. Beside her, the same porcelain teacup seen in every broadcast rested quietly, its handle turned slightly toward the viewer, as if waiting for a new hand to reach for it. No plaque, no title, no name, but every person who walked by knew exactly what they were seeing. The moment when authority was redefined, not by force, but by poise. The photo spread beyond those marble walls. It became the opening slide. One of the National Police Academy's mandatory racial bias training. Not because someone instructed it, but because no one could argue against it. Even cadets who had never heard of Monica Beckford would sit up straight when that image appeared. There were no bullet points, no narration, just a woman standing unflinching in the space where power once tried to intimidate and failed. A senior agent long hailed for his tenure in counterintelligence resigned weeks after the photo was hung. In a resignation letter that quickly leaked, he wrote that lookers in the photo was the first time in 27 years I saw justice not as a sword, but as a mirror, and I couldn't face it. His words echoed across departments, screenshotted, shared, and analyzed. Monica never appeared in the dedications. She declined the interviews. She was invited to lecture at Harvard, at Columbia, even Oxford. She declined them all, not because she lacked the words, but because she'd already spoken once, unmistakably. The only quote ever tied to her by the public, replayed in captions and graffiti across cities, was the one line she never had to repeat. I didn't scream, but they heard me. There were prints of the photo now on office walls, in training booklets, and in museum exhibits. Yet, no one dared hang it in their homes. Not because it wasn't art, but because it demanded something of the room. It stared back, and in its silence, it asked questions many weren't ready to answer. Back in her home, the original negative remained locked in a drawer Monica never opened. She didn't need the image to remember. She had lived it, and those who tried to define her legacy soon learned that legacy ain't what you declare. It's what no one can forget. For recruits, the photograph came before the oath. For veterans, it became a final test. If you could look at her expression and still believe your badge gave you the right to fear nothing, you failed. That was the unspoken rule. One department tried to caption it once, justice personified. The backlash was immediate. It was removed in under an hour, because that photo didn't need a caption. It was a caption, and every time Monica walked past a headline, a policy change, or a protest using her image, she didn't feel pride. She felt complete, not because she'd won, but because the silence she'd held had finally taken root in places where shouting had always failed. Some tried to replicate the moment, to reenact the stillness. But what they missed was that it wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning captured not for style, but for substance, framed not for memory, but for accountability. In the decades to come, no textbook would open with her biography. But the photo, that photo would never be taken down. Thomas Beckford resigned from his federal post on a rainy Tuesday morning. No press conference, no handshake farewell, just a single sheet of paper, typed in crisp black ink, and delivered by hand. When asked why, he gave the simplest answer a public servant could offer without sounding scripted. I began for the country. She continues, for dignity. The halls that once echoed his authority fell silent with those words. Within the week, Monica's name was submitted to the Executive Oversight Committee for appointment. She did not campaign, did not appear in confirmation interviews. The committee confirmed her unanimously, not because she asked for the position, but because the position no longer made sense without her name attached to it. Her office was smaller than expected. No portraits, no flags, just structure, a structure she now had the chance to shape. From that structure came the Beckford Standard legislative draft that would rewrite the rules of engagement, mandatory real-time body camera uploads, regulated search protocols, a blacklist of coercive phrases no longer permitted during field stops. It wasn't symbolic, it was surgical. Each section bore her signature. Each line is a scalpel. Where others looked for reform through speeches, Monica laced accountability into law. The bill moved swiftly, not because of politics, but because opposing it had become a reputational risk no one wanted to bear. Reporters tried to reach her. She remained unreachable. Panels convened. Her chair stayed empty. Commentators speculated about her motivations, her philosophy. She didn't need to correct them. The paper trail did the speaking. Every policy change had a timestamp. Every memo bore her clearance code. Every footstep she took was documented in systems that used to ignore footsteps like hers. Thomas, meanwhile, disappeared into civilian anonymity. His legacy didn't dissolve. It diffused, absorbed into the strength of what followed. At one closed-door meeting, a colleague asked him if he regretted stepping down. He reportedly smiled and said, "Power makes noise," but she made history. In university classrooms, Monica's rise was charted not as a personal triumph, but as a shift in institutional weather. A case study at Harvard Law featured 3 names: Kyle Redford, Ben Laser, Monica Beckford. The course didn't focus on their conflict. It analyzed the trajectory of system response to personal fault lines, the failure, the reckoning, the structural reset. The curriculum didn't call her a hero. It called her a force. And forces don't require applause. They require acknowledgement. No textbook would carry her image, but her decisions would shape the chapters. Students began quoting her signature instead of her quotes, a name at the bottom of Change rather than the top of headlines. Not once did she refer to herself as a leader. Not once did she claim victory. Her email signature remained plain: M. Beckford, Oversight and Compliance. No titles. No initials after her name, because what she fought for wasn't rank, it was weight. Every keystroke, every clause she approved carried it. Her name no longer echoed in protest chants. It echoed in procedural manuals, and that was the real shift. When culture becomes code and silence becomes protocol, justice stops being reactive. It becomes preemptive. The world no longer needed her voice at the podium. It needed her presence in the process, and so she stayed in the background, not hidden, anchored, not absent, strategic. Her job was no longer to confront, it was to embed, to ensure that the next time someone thought of crossing the line, that line was already wired with consequences. In the end, dignity wasn't something she demanded. It was something the system finally had to earn back from her, and she made them work for every inch of it. The next step came not with declarations, but presence. Following the silent current of her influence, Monica appeared at a closed-door national conference on ethical law enforcement oversight. She didn't appear on the guest list. No pre-announcement, just a quiet arrival through a side entrance. Dressed in slate gray, her presence absorbing the room's attention without asking for it. The host, recognizing her instantly, paused mid-sentence and extended an invitation from the podium. "Miss Beckford," he said, "would you share a few words with us?" She did not answer. She simply stood up. The air tightened. Whispers halted. She moved to the stage with measured steps, heels quiet against the floor, posture steady, eyes calm. She reached for the microphone. The crowd leaned forward. Then, gently, she set it down without a word. She turned, faced the screen behind her, and gave a simple nod. The lights dimmed. The video began. No music, no editing, just the original footage. 57 seconds. Monica stood between 2 officers, gaze unwavering, voice absent, silence poured out like a verdict. In that short span, something shifted again across the audience. Heads bowed, eyes brimmed. A few wiped tears quietly, some nodded. One man near the back stood up, stepped out, and never returned. When the video ended, Monica didn't wait for applause. She didn't scan the room. She gave a single respectful nod to the audience, then walked off stage. No commentary, no summary, just exit. And as she left, the screen behind her flickered with the final message in white text against black. "Justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes it just watches." The words hung in the air like fog over still water. The room remained silent for a full minute after she was gone. Then the conversations began, soft, serious, subdued. It wasn't inspiration that filled the space, it was a responsibility. A prosecutor later admitted to rewriting his department's guidelines that same night. An academy director scrapped a decade-old ethics module in favor of a new one centered on silent accountability, and one former officer, now an instructor, updated his slide deck. The first slide now read, "Watch before you speak." Beneath it, a still frame of Monica's expression. Monica gave no interviews following the conference. She didn't need to. The response she orchestrated was not a moment. It was a mirror. One she held up without speaking, daring the system to recognize itself, and many finally did. She didn't need to stand taller. She simply had to remain standing. While others used microphones, she used stillness. While others debated policies, she displayed reality. While others shouted reform, she became the standard by which reform would be measured. And in that moment, on that stage, without uttering a single word, she delivered the most powerful speech the room had ever heard. The silence wasn't empty, it was earned, and it echoed everywhere. It began with a question in a fourth-grade classroom. A hand was raised, a pause, a voice. Who was? Monica Beckford. The teacher didn't blink. She answered plainly, "She's the person who taught us how to see a human being again." No one laughed. The entire room simply listened. Some didn't understand the full weight of the answer, not yet. But they felt its gravity like the deep end of a pool you weren't ready to swim in, but somehow knew mattered. Outside that classroom, the world still debated her name. Some with reverence, others with resentment. But in that moment, among children too young to have formed political allegiances, Monica was not an idea, not a controversy, not a symbol. She was a question that refused to fade, one that demanded more than a nod or a scroll. She was the turning point that no textbook had anticipated, but none could now ignore. Across the country, school boards convened in rooms once used to rubber stamp outdated curricula. This time, the votes were not quiet. Public comment sessions stretched into the night. Parents who had never attended a board meeting showed up, with printed copies of the court transcripts. In one district, an older man stood trembling before the microphone, clutching a worn photograph of his daughter's arrest. "I thought I was doing the right thing when I told her to comply," he said. "Now I know better." Monica Beckford made sure I had to know better. The room didn't clap. It stood. One board member, who had previously voted against the curriculum revision, was later caught on a hot mic saying, "I'm sick of this glorification of confrontation." That clip surfaced online and spread within hours. Within days, a coalition of students occupied the administrative building with handmade signs reading, "Confrontation, unglorified when it's survival." The board member resigned. No replacement was immediately named. The seat remained empty for a full semester. In another district, the state's largest publisher refused to include Monica's case in their new civic studies edition. Their reason? Lack of historical consensus. 3 days later, a group of high school students launched an open-source website compiling every primary document, testimony, time-stamped footage, and legal precedent associated with the trial. They titled it, "Conscience is What Silence Leaves Behind." The site gained 5 million views in under 48 hours. When a media host tried to discredit the page, claiming it was funded by activist donors, screenshots emerged of the host having accepted speaking fees from a law enforcement union that had backed Monica's initial detainment. His network suspended him indefinitely. The students issued no statement. The scholarship fund came not with fanfare, but with wire transfers. Monica refused interviews. She declined panels. Her only condition: no plaque, no ceremony, no name attached. The fund would serve those who chose to enter the law, not to uphold its architecture, but to renovate its foundation. The board overseeing the fund later revealed that Monica had insisted every applicant be judged not only by academic merit, but by a written essay. Describe the first time the system made you invisible. Not everyone answered easily. Some wrote through tears. Others found they had nothing to say until they asked their parents. And then the memories came rushing back like water through a cracked dam. The damages from the federal civil rights case. substantial though they were, could have easily become personal wealth. Most expected her to take it, to build a life with cushions, but Monica turned down every cent tied to her name. She signed one form, scrolled a single sentence in the margin. Let this by forward, not backward, the court clerk who processed. It later wrote a blog post titled "The Quietest Revolution I Ever Filed." It became required reading in a policy ethics course at 3 universities. A professor at one of them, who had once published a column titled "Silence is Not Strategy," issued a retraction 10 years after the fact. He opened it with the line, "Turns out I was the one yelling." Not every response was praise. One prominent legal commentator referred to Monica's decision as irresponsible martyrdom. She did not reply, but months later, the commentator's firm came under fire when a paralegal leaked internal memos revealing deliberate strategies to discredit racial bias claims in jury selection. The commentator confronted at a symposium stood in silence. A student read aloud excerpts from the firm's training documents. "This isn't martyrdom," the student said. "This is what happens when someone decides not to forget." In the revised textbook adopted nationally, Monica's story occupied no more than 4 pages. No dramatic prose, no moralizing, just courtroom testimony, policy shifts, and a single black and white photo of her, not at the height of the media storm, but seated quietly beside a legal aid office filling out forms for someone else. Below the image, a caption, "This is what justice looks like when no one's filming." Teachers reported that students lingered on those pages longer than any others. At the fund's first annual review meeting, they read aloud excerpts from essays written by recipients. One had described the first time she was told by a guidance counselor not to aim too high with her law school applications. Another recalled his uncle being deported after a routine traffic stop escalated without cause. Another wrote of her mother scrubbing blood from the back seat of a car, asking no questions, trusting none would be answered. And then there was the recipient who, after reading her letter aloud to the room, folded the page in 4, looked up and said, "I don't want to become Monica Beckford. I want to make sure no one ever needs to." At a parent-teacher meeting in Atlanta, a mother shared, "My daughter used to flinch when she saw police lights. Now, she tells me, I'm more afraid of losing my character than staying quiet." In a room where laminated calendars and dry erase boards usually shape the rhythm of discussion, her words rippled through the air like a fault line, splitting open the safe language that had long buffered educators from reckoning. No one interrupted. No one shifted in their chairs. A teacher known for her sharp tone and quicker dismissals sat with her hands folded, eyes lowered, not in shame, but in suspension. What do you say when a child teaches you what courage looks like? Not through defiance, but through discipline of the soul. Elsewhere, in a sunlit hallway between 2nd grade and 5th grade classrooms, a crayon drawing hung behind a glass frame. The colors had faded slightly, but the image remained sharp. A woman stood in beige, hands out, not raised, not clenched, just out as if forming a barrier only conviction could maintain. On either side of her were officers, their badges misshapen in the way children render authority as both unclear and oversized. But beside her feet stood a dog. It wore a collar labeled Justice. Letters uneven, the E backwards. No teacher corrected the spelling. No one translated the symbolism. The drawing was left untouched as if tampering with it would erase something too fragile to rebuild. Visitors often paused before it longer than the display case of academic medals down the hall. In another part of the country, a state-level conference for law enforcement cadets commenced with no pledge, no anthem, and no statistics, just a projector screen lowering, a click, and 57 seconds of grainy handheld footage. Monica Beckford's voice never appeared in the clip. It didn't need to? The footage showed her standing still as a crowd surged. Officers approached, their hands twitching toward holsters not yet drawn, then static, then nothing. The silence after was longer than the video. Instructors let it breathe. They didn't speak first. That honor was reserved for whichever cadet dared to ask, Not what she had done, but what the rest had failed to. The sessions evolved less about tactics, more about timing, less about procedure, more about presence. At the back of the room, one instructor kept a file labeled "Not Protocol Pattern." During a disciplinary hearing in a wealthy private school, a student was nearly expelled for a graffiti scroll on a faculty parking sign. Monica would have sat down, too. The administrators called it vandalism. The student called it a reference. When the news broke, the school's board insisted they held all students to high standards of decorum, but leaked audio revealed one trustee dismissing the situation as a phase of inherited grievance theater. That comment exploded online. Alumni penned open letters. Donors withheld checks. 3 faculty members resigned in protest. And by the semester's end, the student's record was cleared. In its place, the school introduced a new elective titled Civil Disobedience and Constitutional Ethics, co-designed by that same student, now reinstated with honors. On social media, where virality often favored outrage over introspection, something shifted. Hashtags once dripping with sarcasm began to yield space to threads of patient pointed thought. Memes gave way to memoranda. One librarian started a list, books Monica would have read. It became a crowdsourced archive. A conservative columnist tried to frame it as political indoctrination via literature, but then screenshots emerged. The same columnist had been part of a private forum mocking police brutality victims with emojis. Within a day, to speaking engagements were canceled. He later stated, "Re-evaluating public tone, no apology, just absence." In South Dakota, during a televised debate over education reform, a state senator declared Monica's inclusion in the curriculum a glorification of grievance. 24 hours later, his campaign's donation portal was flooded with $2 donations marked grievance tax. When asked, donors said they wanted to remind him that silence no longer meant neutrality, it meant complicity by design. His opponent won the seat with a campaign slogan lifted from a 5th grade essay, "Listen loudly." At a high school in New Jersey, a visiting speaker introduced a lecture on digital ethics with a slide that simply read, "Silence is not absence." She then read aloud an excerpt from an anonymous letter submitted by a student during a school-wide assignment. When I first heard about Monica Beckford, I thought she must have shouted, but then I watched the video and I realized she didn't. She just didn't move. And somehow that was louder. The room fell quiet. No bell interrupted. Students sat through lunch unwilling to break what had been made whole by one sentence held too long in the air. Even within federal agencies, shifts began not with policy, but posture. A leaked internal memo from a training division in Washington revealed a new standard for narrative case studies no longer anonymized. Monica's name was printed, not in bold, but centered, unembellished. The bullet points beneath did not describe her actions, but the systems in action. One point read, "Failure to listen is the first step in permission." The memo was not intended for public release, but when it surfaced, no retraction followed. Instead, the department posted a statement that read, "Only learning means saying her name." In a public middle school library in Ohio, a teacher organized a student debate on whether courage required words. The final round came down to 8th graders, some quoting speeches from the past, the other quoting the silences that followed them. The winning argument, "If your voice trembles, but you stand anyway, that's louder than anything you'll ever say." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was deliberate, as if students were learning not just to cheer, but to understand what should be cheered. The drawing in the hallway was scanned and reprinted for use in classrooms across the nation. The original stayed in its frame, now slightly tilted from age, but never adjusted. The dog named Justice remained crooked, faithful, and watchful. Teachers used it not as a prompt, but as a pause. They let students ask questions before they offered answers. Some never did, but they stared longer than expected. Some wiped their eyes and didn't say why. On a discussion thread labeled, "Why We Still Talk About Monica," one comment went viral. We don't teach her story to remember trauma, we teach it so we don't repeat permission. Monica herself remained largely absent from the public eye. She didn't attend the ceremonies. She didn't grant interviews. When a journalist tried to contact her for a book, her reply was a single sentence emailed with no sign-off. I'd rather the story stay in your hands than your spotlight. A group of historians submitted a motion to designate the Beckford residence a National Civic Integrity Site. The application passed unanimously. On the listing, the description read, "Site of documented resistance, not by defiance, but by decency." Ben's name, along with Kyle's, was now officially included in legal ethics case studies taught in over 30 law schools. But it was Monica's image, still silent and steady, that graced the inside cover of one of the most widely distributed textbooks on justice in the nation. None of it was designed to glorify her. It was designed to recalibrate the gaze, not to rewrite history, just to read it correctly and never look away again. A year later, the walls of Lincoln High looked the same, peeling corners near the stairwell, dust clinging to trophy cases celebrating victories older than most of the students. But something had shifted. The students sensed it the moment Monica Beckford entered, not with the armor of public legacy, but in jeans, a wool blazer, and a gray notebook clutched to her side like a pact unspoken. The classroom lights buzzed faintly overhead. A faint breeze rustled through the cracked window. She didn't command the room with celebrity. She didn't have to. Her silence, sharpened by survival, was its echo. She walked past the posters of historical quotes and sat for a second in the teacher's chair, letting the metal legs cack beneath her weight. The teacher, Mrs. Callahan, nodded and stepped aside. No podium, no prelude, just Monica standing where so many had spoken before her, but never with that weight. "I don't have answers," she said. "I only have something I lived through and chose not to sleep through." The room hushed. Pens stopped moving. Phones for once were down. She looked at no one in particular, yet no one escaped her gaze. "Sometimes," she continued, "the loudest thing you can do is not make a sound." She didn't gesture. She didn't blink fast to fight tears. Her stillness was surgical. The air grew thick, the kind that presses down on lungs and makes shallow breathing feel like drowning. "They told me silence was complicity. They also told me noise was dangerous. So, which is it?" Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It curled through the room like smoke, sinking into corners, clinging to the rib cages of those who dared to listen. In the third week of the trial, back when her name was more viral hashtag than human syllable, a prosecutor had called her unreliable on national television. Not in court, not in cross-examination, just in a sound bite he offered while smiling. Outside a courthouse, the crowd had cheered. A woman behind him nodded so aggressively her earrings clinked against her shoulder, and Monica had watched from a hospital room for still in her arm, a bruise in the shape of a badge blooming just below her collarbone. The court never saw that footage. It was dismissed as prejudicial, but the clip of her dazed and coughing, resisting the urge to scream while being shoved into the back of a cruiser that aired on every local news channel by dinner time. The media called it uncertain footage. Some outlets blurred her face, others didn't. Now, in this classroom, she didn't retell those scenes. She let them haunt the silence, let the scars speak in the tremble of her pinky, which she kept hidden behind her notebook. A girl near the back braids, tight hoodies zipped to the throat shifted. Eyes fixed on Monica's hands. She saw it, saw the tremor, but said nothing. Sometimes, recognition is louder than applause. Monica glanced down, then back up, locking eyes with no one and everyone. "There's a cost to silence," she said, "but there's a bigger cost to performance. They want you loud when they can paint it as rage. They want you quiet when they can call it a shame. But when you sit in the middle breathing, thinking, surviving, they don't know what to do with that." For months after the trial ended, the mayor held a press conference to honor those who helped restore civic harmony. Monica's name wasn't mentioned, but the officer who filed the false report received a plaque for exemplary service under pressure. The plaque made headlines. Then the photos emerged him drunk, waving a handgun outside a club, laughing as a woman stumbled past. The city tried to scrub the footage, but someone had streamed it live. When asked, the department declined to comment, citing ongoing internal review. A mural painted over the police station, originally bearing the phrase "Protect and Serve," was quietly whitewashed 3 days later. No announcement, just gone. Still, Monica never gave interviews. She didn't tweet. She didn't write op-eds or release a memoir. She visited her grandmother's church. She helped her sister finish night school. She worked part-time at a community library, shelving books with hands that once clutched steel handcuffs and now only brushed spines. A reporter followed her once, tried to photograph her reading to children. Monica turned her back, blocking the lens with her notebook. The photo never ran, but the reporter published a quote anyway, fabricated, laced with faux poetry about healing. The paper issued no retraction. People confuse silence with surrender, she said now, fingers grazing the corner of her gray notebook. But silence, when chosen, isn't defeat, it's pressure. It builds, and when it's released, even gently, it cracks. Things open. A student in the front row frowned. He was skeptical. Good. Skepticism meant his mind was still his. Monica offered no rebuttal. She respected resistance more than obedience. Last December, the DA, who had refused to indict the officer, attended a gala hosted by a local university. His name was read aloud among those committed to justice. But midway through dinner, 5 alumni returned their awards, laying them on the podium during dessert. One left a note, "We don't dine where truth chokes." The video went viral. The DA's office later claimed it was an unfortunate misunderstanding. The misunderstanding had nearly cost Monica her voice. Her jaw hadn't fully healed until spring. A girl from the middle row raised her hand. "Did you think about running?" she asked. Monica tilted her head. "Running where?" she answered. "From what?" "From me." A few students chuckled nervously. "I didn't run," she continued. "But I did hide for a while. In plain sight, smiling, nodding, making myself small so others could feel tall." Her voice didn't break, but it bent just slightly, like a note held one beat too long. "Then I realized shrinking doesn't protect you from harm. It just makes the wounds harder to see." The room was so still that even the hum of the overhead lights sounded like thunder. No one shifted, no one checked. The clock. When the department head, who once called Monica an unreliable witness with delusional tendencies, tried to launch a consultancy firm 2 months ago, his first investor backed out minutes after the press release. The reason? His daughter, a sophomore at Lincoln High, had written an essay titled, "What Silence Taught Me." She had never met Monica, but she had read the transcript of the trial, and she had drawn a line with the clarity only young people seem to possess. "My father believed in loud lies. Monica made me believe in quiet truths." Back in the classroom, a boy in the second row, cheek bruised from last week's scuffle with a hall monitor who'd accused him of walking too fast, raised his hand. His voice cracked, but his eyes did not. "Were you ever afraid?" Monica paused, eyes scanning the ceiling as if reading something only she could see. Then she replied, "I was afraid that I'd stay silent too long." The hallway smelled faintly of dust and pencil shavings, though the floors had been mopped just an hour before. The afternoon sun slanted through narrow windows, cutting golden stripes across the linoleum. Monica walked without hurry, her steps neither heavy nor soft, just enough to remind the air that she was there. Doors were closing behind her, not loudly, but deliberately, as if the room had to take a breath now that she had left it. Her presence had not been loud, but it had filled every corner. She didn't look back. The echoes of her words still lingered in that classroom, suspended in the space where students were too young to understand the full weight of truth, yet old enough to feel it press down on their bones. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. They had listened because silence, when it came from someone who had been forced to swallow fire, becomes sacred. 2 years ago, the same building had hosted a fundraiser back the blue. The same auditorium now used for silent reflection. Banners had hung from the rafters. A local politician had shaken hands with the same officer who would later shove Monica against a patrol car for noncompliance. The footage from that night, the body cam malfunctioned, but a teenager had live-streamed it, captured her trying to explain calmly that she was only helping an injured child on the sidewalk. The officer barked commands. She wasn't given time to obey. When his hand wrapped around her wrist, she didn't scream, not even when her head struck the car's mirror. Later, he'd say she was agitated. Later, still, he would race a not in disgrace, but to take a consulting job for crowd control training. His new office was vandalized last spring. Spray paint in block letters. Do you control this? The air outside was thick with pollen and tension. Monica passed by a bench where two teachers whispered, their voices low, their glances brief, but unmistakable. One of them had once told reporters she didn't think race had anything to do with it. That clip went viral, but what followed didn't. Corey, a week later, a group of students, all white, locked themselves inside the school theater, holding a silent vigil for Monica. No candles, just presence. They refused to speak to the press. Their only statement was a sign, handwritten in chalk, "We learn by unlearning." The teacher had tried to enter only to be turned away. Respectfully, but firmly, she took a leave of absence the next day. The district never clarified if she returned. Down the steps, Monica walked past a mural, new one painted over the cafeteria's brick wall. It wasn't her. She had refused that. Instead, it was a faceless figure, 1 foot forward, cloak sweeping behind with the words, "Speak when silence costs too much." The muralist, a former janitor, had been fired 6 months before for insubordination after refusing to erase a student's graffiti quote about systemic failure. His dismissal sparked a boycott. Trash piled up. The school smelled of mildew. Parents complained. That's when students stepped in, rotating cleanup crews, baking soap to raise funds, even holding Zoom interviews with sanitation engineers to understand waste cycles. The district finally rehired him after 4 weeks. He declined the offer and published a blog titled, "If they couldn't stomach a quote, why trust them with truth?" It went viral. 3 school board members resigned within the month. Monica crossed the quad, the grass brittle underfoot from last summer's drought. A group of boys stood by the vending machines, eyes fixed on her, not hostile, not curious, watchful. One of them wore a hoodie with the hood down, school policy enforced harshly, only on students who looked like him. Another had the sleeve of his jacket stitched with quiet defiance. "My body is not probable cause." They didn't wave. Neither did she, but something passed between them. Recognition unspoken. At the gate, a woman in a navy blazer stood waiting. Principal Emery, whose voice had cracked during the disciplinary hearing the previous year. She had once defended the school's cooperation with law enforcement, insisting protocols were followed. That recording, leaked by a student, had been overlaid with footage of Monica being slammed against the cruiser. The clip circulated in montage form. Protocol is not morality. Emery's office had been spray-painted overnight with that same phrase. When asked later if she would step down, Emery only said, "This building doesn't need martyrs. It needs mirrors." Monica nodded as they passed each other. No words, just a glance. One that said, "You finally looked." As she reached the parking lot, a girl in an oversized backpack came running, breathless, clutching a worn notebook whose spine had split from too many nights under pressure. She hesitated just behind Monica, unsure whether to interrupt. Monica turned before being called. Her senses were sharp that way. The girl stopped, eyes flicking up, then down, then back up again. "Has anyone ever apologized to you?" Her voice barely cleared the wind. For a moment, Time held still. A bird shrieked in the distance, startled by nothing and everything. Monica studied the girl, not her question, but the tremor underneath it, the need to know whether pain can be reversed, whether wrongs can be undone if named aloud. Monica smiled. Not the kind reserved for cameras or interviews, not the weary kind carved from survival, but one of clarity. "No," she said, "but I don't live for apologies. I live so they never dare do it again." The floor tiles still bore the scuff marks from years of passage heels, sneakers, boots that once stomped in protest, and others that skittered away from confrontation. The hallway smelled like old wood, recycled air, and faint bleach, but under that lingered something heavier. Not fear, not reverence, expectation. The kind that arrives not with sirens, but with footsteps, quiet and even, each one undoing a little of what the world thought it had already named. Monica Beckford didn't walk like a teacher, though that's what they'd introduced her as. She didn't carry herself like a survivor, though some students whispered the word with reverence, as if survival were a rank you earned by standing in front of fire and coming back with your name still intact. She walked like someone who no longer needed to explain what silence could do, and when she entered room 207, fluorescent lights humming, chairs askew, posters curling at the corners, nobody spoke, not because they were told to be quiet, but because their bodies recognized something their minds hadn't caught up to yet. She didn't open with a story. She didn't gesture toward the past like a wound that still required gauze. She stood, hands at her sides, notebook unopened, and asked, "What would you do if everyone decided your silence meant agreement?" A few students glanced around. One scribbled something. Another stopped mid-scroll on their phone. The question landed like a stone in a shallow pool. No splash, just widening rings. She waited, not for an answer, but for discomfort to do its work. Then she spoke, not to condemn, not to inspire, but to expose, not others. The room, the way breath can tighten when history enters without knocking. 3 years ago, when the footage first surfaced, they had called her aggressive, not in court, but on headlines. A composite of her still image, her eyes mid-blink, made the rounds on talk shows. One anchor paused dramatically and said, "We'll never know the full story." The audience nodded. Applause tracks sowed. What they never aired was the 17-second clip before the incident helping a child cross a flooded street. Her hands raised as she tried to de-escalate a man in uniform who already had his hand on his holster. That man, once named Officer Curtis Gray, later ran for school board on a platform of returning order. He won, but 3 months into his term, leaked emails revealed that he had once ordered teachers to compile behavior lists filtered by race and zip code. The emails spread like wildfire. Parents staged a walkout. Someone projected the phrase "order isn't justice" onto the school's gymnasium wall during a basketball game. The board convened an emergency session. He resigned, citing media harassment. No charges were filed. Monica never commented. In her lecture, she never used the word trauma, not because it wasn't true, but because it had been weaponized, made into a diagnosis, a spectacle, a checkbox for funding. Instead, she spoke of forgetting, of how forgetting becomes policy, of how forgetting allows the same hands that once pinned you down to offer you scholarships and plaques and televised apologies. When memory becomes performance, she said, power forgets its reflection. A teacher at the back cleared his throat too loudly. He had once told his class that Monica was an example of how emotion clouds facts. His words resurfaced 2 years later, quoted in a student essay that won a national award. When asked if he regretted his statement, he replied, "Context matters." The next day, students filled his whiteboard with every context his curriculum had left out. He retired at semester's end. Monica hadn't blinked during the story. She had simply let it pass. Her presence had a way of emptying noise, not silencing people, but erasing the parts of performance they didn't realize they wore. A girl who had once tweeted that Monica made everything about race later published a blog titled "The Day I Heard My Self-Talk." It went viral not because it was eloquent, but because it was honest. She described sitting in a classroom and feeling her lungs tighten, not from fear, but from realizing she had mistaken comfort for truth. Her words weren't an apology. They were a confession, and they ended simply. She never raised her voice. I was the one yelling inside. Now in room 207, Monica asked no rhetorical questions. She offered no blueprint for resistance. She showed them what endurance looked like when it had stopped needing to prove its survival. Her voice didn't waver, but it never flattened into a lecture. It bent, curved, paused like breath over an open wound. One student, eyes rimmed red, leaned forward as if reaching for something invisible between them. Another, usually silent, scribbled notes, furiously not to remember, but to stop himself from interrupting. Weeks earlier, a podcast host had mocked her visit to public schools, saying, "I don't see what a glorified victim can teach kids." That same host was later dropped from a sponsorship deal. When a former intern released audio of him joking about protesters being great for traffic ratings, the sponsor's statement read, "We believe voices should illuminate, not exploit." Monica never mentioned it. The bell rang, but nobody moved. The air felt heavier than when she arrived, not because it was darker, but because it had stopped pretending to be light. She stepped back, notebook still unopened, and nodded. No goodbye, no flourish, just a pivot, a step. The door easing closed behind her like a secret leaving the room. She walked away, not slowly, not deliberately, just forward. The students didn't clap. They didn't need to. They sat with it, the kind of silence that educates louder than sound. In the newly released National Textbook on Human Rights, the final sentence read, "Justice isn't loud." It remembers, Monica Beckford wasn't a myth. She didn't become a monument. She stayed a mirror. She never told the country what it was. She made it look at itself and decide what it wanted to be. We thought we understood her. We didn't. We still don't. But now we